July 12, 2023, Palm Ridge Correctional Facility, Georgia. At exactly 6:37 a.m., Correctional Officer Maya Jenkins walked down the East Wing for the morning head count. She'd done this routine every day for the past 8 years. Nothing ever changed until that morning. When she reached cell B12, Jenkins stopped. The slot was closed. The lights were off. She tapped once on the metal door. "Tasha Monroe," she called out. No answer. She tried again, louder. Still nothing. Protocol said to wait 3 minutes and try again. But something felt wrong. When she unlocked the door and swung it open, the scene inside stopped her cold. Tasha Monroe, 29 years old, lay perfectly still on the cot. Her face was peaceful, eerily so. Her left wrist hung off the side, limp and pale. On the far wall, illuminated faintly by morning light through the barred window, there was writing. A message, written in blood. "Justice isn't silent. You just refuse to hear it." Jenkins stumbled back, called for backup, and within minutes, the entire wing was placed under lockdown. Within 2 hours, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was on site. And within 2 days, 8 correctional officers tested positive for HIV, including Jenkins herself. That's when the story unraveled. Before she was inmate number 871925, Tasha Lorraine Monroe was a licensed practical nurse in Savannah. Bright, warm, driven. Her co-workers remembered her as the one who brought homemade banana bread every Monday and volunteered on weekends at a free clinic. She had a 3-year-old daughter, a mortgage, and a husband with a short fuse. His name was Damon Monroe, a local contractor with a temper and a record for domestic disturbance. Over 3 years of marriage, there were 6 police reports, 2 emergency room visits, and at least 1 restraining order, never enforced. On the night of June 2nd, 2018, Damon came home drunk and angry. Neighbors heard the fight. A scream, a crash, then silence. When police arrived, Tasha was sitting in the corner of the living room, rocking back and forth, holding her daughter. Damon lay face down in the kitchen with a kitchen knife buried in his back. She told the officers, "I thought he was going to kill me this time." But self-defense cases are tricky, especially when the victim has no prior convictions and the woman has no visible bruises by the time of trial. In October 2019, Tasha was sentenced to 20 years for second-degree murder. Her daughter went to live with Damon's mother, and Tasha was shipped off to Palm Ridge, a concrete graveyard for women the world had given up on. For the first year, Tasha didn't speak to anyone, not other inmates, not staff, not the therapist the prison assigned. She kept her head down. She worked laundry detail. She read books. To most guards, she was invisible. But that invisibility in a place like Palm Ridge wasn't always a shield. It was a target. Palm Ridge had a reputation, not just for overcrowding and understaffing, but for something darker, something whispered about in court documents and buried HR files: systemic abuse. Over the past decade, at least 4 lawsuits have been filed against staff members at the facility, accusing them of sexual coercion, physical assault, and retaliation. None of those cases ever saw trial. Most were settled quietly. Some disappeared entirely. That's how Warden Charles Bailey described her during the press conference. She kept to herself, never caused trouble, no disciplinary actions on file. Frankly, we're all shocked. But behind that quiet demeanor, Tasha was keeping track of everything: officer names, schedules, patterns, who visited whom, who disappeared from the roster suddenly, who started acting nervous. She noticed when certain guards took inmates out of their cells at night. She noticed who came back crying, and she noticed who looked her in the eye and who didn't. In March 2023, a part-time medical technician at Palm Ridge noticed something unusual. 3 male officers came in separately requesting HIV testing. One of them, visibly panicked, said it was routine. Weeks later, 2 more officers, this time female, quietly asked for the same test. By May, the facility's internal medical log showed a total of 8 corrections officers, 5 men, 3 women, testing positive for HIV. It was never reported to the state. Instead, those results were buried under confidential medical records, and the infected officers were advised to seek treatment privately. But rumors had already started. Among inmates, among nurses, among a few guards who still had a conscience. They all whispered the same name. Tasha Monroe. Officer Maya Jenkins, the one who found her, later testified she had spoken to Tasha just 2 days before her death. She was calm, Jenkins said. Too calm. She asked if I believed in justice. I thought she was just trying to sound deep or something. When asked if Tasha ever showed signs of illness, Jenkins shook her head. She looked fine, just cold, distant. But her eyes looked like someone who'd already said goodbye. The autopsy would reveal no signs of external trauma. No obvious drugs or poisons. No suicide note. Just a message on the wall. Written in type O-negative blood, Tasha's blood type. A full toxicology report was pending. But inside the prison, the damage was already done. Whispers turned into panic. And Palm Ridge would never be the same again. Long before she became the woman who turned a prison inside out, Tasha Lorraine Monroe was just another face in the crowd. A nurse, a wife, a mother, and someone who believed that if she followed the rules, life would eventually be kind to her. She was wrong. In Savannah, Georgia, Tasha worked nights at Riverview General as an LPN, calm under pressure, quick with a smile. Her supervisor, Angie Pollard, later recalled, she was the one you called when things were falling apart. Always there, always steady. But sometimes there was this sadness behind her eyes, like she was bracing for something. Tasha's husband, Damon Monroe, was a different story. A former semi-pro football player turned contractor, Damon was charming to outsiders. He showed up to family cookouts, gave big hugs, cracked jokes. But at home, behind closed doors, he had a temper. A brutal one. The abuse started small. Comments about her weight, her friends, her clothes. Then came the shoving. Then slaps, then punches. And yet, Tasha stayed. She stayed for their daughter, Layla. She stayed because she thought he would change. She stayed because every time she packed a bag, Damon would cry and promise and fall to his knees. She called the police once, then regretted it for years, because the system didn't help her. The officers warned him, but no arrest was made. She was told to be careful, like she'd accidentally stepped on the edge of a cliff she hadn't built. Eventually, even her mother stopped answering when she called crying at 2 a.m. You made your bed, Tasha, her mother had told her. Now lie in it. It was June 2nd, 2018. Tasha had worked a double shift. She came home at 11:15 p.m., exhausted. Layla was asleep in her room. Damon was already drunk. The fight escalated quickly, screaming accusations about where she'd been, whether she was cheating. A coffee mug flew across the room. A dining chair shattered. Tasha tried to grab her daughter and run, but Damon blocked the hallway. He grabbed her by the throat. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. She remembered thinking, this is how I die. Then she reached blindly for the kitchen drawer. The next 10 seconds blurred into instinct. When police arrived 12 minutes later, Damon was dead. Tasha had dropped the knife, fallen to her knees, and wrapped herself around Layla. She didn't fight arrest. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She just kept whispering, he was going to kill me. The prosecution painted her as unstable, impulsive, and resentful. They brought up a diary entry she'd written 6 months prior, saying she wished Damon would disappear. They ignored the hospital records. They ignored the protective order she'd tried and failed to get enforced. They didn't allow Layla to testify, deeming her too young. Her public defender? Overworked, uninspired. He urged her to take a plea. If you fight this, he warned, and lose, you're looking at life. Take the deal and be out in 17, maybe. So she signed the papers. 2nd-degree murder. 20 years. No parole for the first 12. Layla was taken into custody by Damon's mother, Angela Monroe, who never hid her hatred for Tasha. I'll make sure Layla forgets you ever existed, she spat during sentencing. And just like that, Tasha Monroe ceased to be a nurse, a wife, or a mother. She became inmate number 871925. Palm Ridge wasn't where most women were supposed to end up for 2nd-degree murder. But bed shortages, combined with her mental health red flags, led to her transfer in late 2019. From the outside, Palm Ridge looked like any other rural women's correctional facility. Gray stone walls, razor wire, a chapel, a garden no one used. Inside, it was survival of the silent. The guards didn't bother hiding their favoritism or their threats. Some traded protection for favors. Some demanded more. The invisible women, the quiet ones, were often the most vulnerable. Tasha entered that world hollowed out. She didn't speak for months. When prison psychologist Dr. Renee Holloway tried to interview her, Tasha simply stared. Dr. Holloway's note in the file read, "No indication of self-harm. Flat effect, possibly disassociated, recommending isolation until stabilized." So they gave her medication and locked her in segregation. It happened 6 months after she arrived. Inmate records show Tasha was pulled from her cell at 2:45 a.m. by Officer Daryl Hughes for a routine wellness check. There was no logbook entry, no body cam footage, and Tasha didn't speak about it to anyone. But after that night, she refused to eat for 4 days. She stopped talking. She started scratching her arms raw until they bled. When Dr. Holloway saw her again, she wrote, "Possible psychotic break, requesting long-term evaluation." What she didn't write was that 4 other women in segregation had shown the same symptoms: catatonia, paranoia, self-harm, after midnight cell pulls by the same group of guards. But at Palm Ridge, patterns weren't investigated. They were buried. By 2021, Tasha was off most meds, back in general population. But she wasn't the same. She didn't cry, didn't laugh, didn't speak unless required. But her eyes? They saw everything. She started watching guards, not in fear, but in calculation. She took jobs that gave her access to files, to rosters. She offered to help in the infirmary. She got close to people who trusted her. And slowly, methodically, she began building something. Not a support system, not a community, a plan. By mid-2021, the invisible inmate named Tasha Monroe had transformed into someone else entirely. She still kept to herself, still moved silently, still rarely spoke unless directly addressed. But underneath the silence, she was watching, memorizing, calculating. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was preparing. Palm Ridge was a place where the rules bent depending on who enforced them. Certain guards operated with unchecked authority, especially in the dead hours between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Body cams malfunctioned. Security footage overrode itself, and paperwork went missing like clockwork. Tasha learned the patterns. Which guard preferred working segregation rounds? Which officers stayed longer in inmates' cells than they were supposed to? Which female guards flirted to get ahead? And which ones resented it? She noticed 2 distinct groups among the correctional staff. Predators, men and women who abused their power behind closed doors. Cowards, those who saw but said nothing. And both were vulnerable. The first was Officer Jerome Lattimore, 42, a veteran at Palm Ridge. He was well-liked, cocky, and known to show interest in clean inmates, those with no disciplinary history. He took a special liking to Tasha. At first, it was harmless. Extra food on her tray, extended time at the infirmary. Then came the accidental brushes of the hand, the late-night conversations, the promises of help, transfers, maybe even parole recommendations. Tasha didn't resist. She leaned in, slowly, cautiously. They began having encounters in the utility closet near the kitchen, a spot with no cameras. What Jerome never realized was that Tasha saved everything: his notes, his gifts, and, most importantly, a used condom hidden in a sealed plastic bag behind a loose ceiling tile. Once she had Jerome, others followed. It wasn't about seduction. It was about leverage. Tasha offered something each person wanted. For Jerome, the illusion of control. For Officer Tanya Willis, emotional intimacy in an otherwise hollow marriage. For Officer Darnell Hughes, power trips he couldn't act out in the real world. For Officer Angela Parks, validation. A reason to feel important in a place that sucked everyone dry. Within months, Tasha had engaged in sexual or physical encounters with at least 8 officers, 5 men, 3 women. She never initiated. She never begged. She never manipulated with words. She simply allowed herself to become whatever they needed her to be. And in doing so, she owned them. Unbeknownst to the officers, Tasha had tested positive for HIV shortly after her arrival in 2019 through a standard intake medical screen. The file was marked confidential and sealed by a prison doctor who has since retired under questionable circumstances. Tasha knew. She always knew. But no one ever asked. No one ever warned the staff. And the guards who abused her early on, they never wore protection. They never cared. Now it was their turn not to know. What makes this story more than just an act of revenge is that Tasha didn't lash out immediately. She waited. She built her web over years. She never spoke a word of threat or resentment. Instead, she documented. She kept a hidden journal sewn into the lining of her mattress. She listed names, times, dates. She stole small items, a patch off a uniform, a used glove, a wrapper with fingerprints. She even used her brief time helping in the infirmary to sneak medical specimen tubes, which she labeled and sealed using alcohol swabs and wax. Tasha wasn't just building a case. She was building a message. In early 2022, a package arrived at the P.O. box of freelance investigative journalist Samantha Wells, a former writer for the Atlanta Post. Inside was a USB drive, a short letter, and the following note. They call me silent. But silence is just the echo of stories no one wants to hear. Help me tell mine. The USB drive contained voice memos Tasha secretly recorded using a smuggled MP3 player, photos of letters and logs she'd hidden in books, a list of names and allegations. Samantha, at first, thought it was a hoax, but the prison badge numbers and timestamps matched real employees. She tried contacting the Department of Corrections. They ignored her, so she waited until the moment Palm Ridge cracked open. By mid-2023, the infected officers began showing signs. Fatigue, skin lesions, drastic weight loss, multiple requests for sick leave and outside medical appointments. At least 2 were hospitalized. The prison quietly altered the roster. Rumors began. One officer, Angela Parks, confessed to a co-worker that she'd made a mistake and was being punished for it by God. Another, Officer Hughes, was seen crying alone in the staff parking lot. The inmates, always quick to sense weakness, started talking. And one name kept circling back, Tasha Monroe. 2 weeks before her death, Tasha submitted a formal request to transfer to a minimum security unit. In it, she wrote, "I have complied with all behavioral expectations. I believe I have earned a second chance at dignity." It was denied. 3 days later, she was written up for inmate manipulation of staff. Then came the order, 14 days in segregation. No visitors, no contact, just Tasha. And her final plan, segregation at Palm Ridge, wasn't just punishment. It was erasure. 14 days in a cell no bigger than a walk-in closet. A thin mattress on a concrete slab. A toilet with no seat. No books. No human contact, just a metal door and the humming of bad fluorescent lights. This is where they sent inmates when they wanted them to disappear without bruises. Tasha Monroe entered that box on July 1st, 2023. She never came out. The official record shows that Tasha was disciplined for allegedly manipulating a staff member for special treatment. No one ever clarified what that meant. Warden Charles Bailey signed the isolation order himself. During the first few days, Tasha refused meals. Then she started eating again. She didn't speak to guards, didn't make noise. She simply waited. Every morning, Officer Maya Jenkins would walk past her cell, glance in through the rectangular slot, and mark inmate responsive. No issues. But on July 11th, Jenkins wrote a slightly different note. Inmate sitting upright, not moving, would not respond to verbal check. She didn't escalate it. No one did. At 6:37 a.m. on July 12th, Jenkins returned for head count. This time, Tasha didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. And on the wall behind her bed, written in thick smears of blood, was the now infamous message. Justice isn't silent. You just refuse to hear it. The investigation was immediate. The panic was silent but heavy. By noon, the warden had ordered a full lockdown of the west and east wings. By sunset, the story had already leaked to the local news. But the most stunning revelation came from the prison's infirmary log. Because 6 of the 8 officers who had tested positive for HIV were now on indefinite medical leave. And all 6 had something in common. They'd all spent extra time alone with Tasha Monroe. The autopsy revealed no signs of external trauma. There were no ligature marks, no signs of asphyxiation or blunt force injury. Toxicology found only trace amounts of antidepressants and sedatives, consistent with her prescription. No lethal levels. No suicide note. No pill bottles. Just a sealed plastic pen casing, found tucked beneath the mattress seam, coated with wax, and inside, fragments of a crushed pill compound mixed with peanut butter. It was enough to stop her heart, but not show up as a standard overdose. This wasn't a cry for help. This was premeditated self-erasure. Blood analysis confirmed it was her own. She'd used a sharpened toothbrush to prick the tip of her finger and painstakingly wrote out each letter. The stroke marks were slow, deliberate. Justice isn't silent. You just refuse to hear it. For most, it was just a final dramatic flourish. But for Samantha Wells, the investigative journalist who had been quietly gathering documents for months, it was something more. It was a signal, because Samantha had just received a package in the mail the day before. Inside the envelope was a second USB drive, labeled, "If I die, start here." Samantha opened it. Dozens of PDFs, scanned letters, copies of disciplinary reports, medical records, logs of sexual misconduct that had never been filed officially. But more shocking were the voice recordings. Tasha's voice. They said I was silent. But every time I tried to speak, they punished me. So I started keeping score. I'm not a killer. I'm just tired of watching men who hurt people walk free. There were names, dates, descriptions of abuse, each one matched by a known officer or report timestamp. There were also photographs, blurry but recognizable, showing officers entering restricted areas after hours. Some even showed uniform name tags caught in mirrors. It was a digital confession, but it wasn't a confession of guilt. It was a confession of exposure. When news broke that Samantha had shared the files with the Department of Justice, Warden Bailey tried to claim it was a hoax. That Tasha was mentally unstable and had fabricated stories for attention. But within 48 hours, the DOJ subpoenaed all staff medical records. 2 guards resigned. 1 attempted suicide. And Officer Tanya Willis, one of the infected, told her sister in a recorded phone call, "I thought she loved me, but she knew the whole time. She knew what she was doing." The DOJ launched a full-scale investigation into Palm Ridge Correctional Facility. Within a week, Warden Bailey was placed on administrative leave. Officer Darnell Hughes was arrested for sexual assault of an inmate. 3 other guards were indicted for tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. Internal Affairs revealed 4 past complaints of rape in Palm Ridge had mysteriously vanished from records. The prison system was no longer able to hide. Tasha's death sparked something unexpected. Women who had spent years afraid began to talk. One by one, letters were written. Some asked for anonymity. Some asked for interviews. Some just wanted to be believed. She was the first one who didn't cry when they came for her, one inmate wrote. She watched them like a scientist watching lab rats. She didn't scream. She remembered. Tasha wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. And in the end, she became the final voice in a place designed to silence women like her. The death of Tasha Monroe had been tragic. But what followed, what her death unleashed, was something the Georgia Department of Corrections hadn't seen in decades. Within 7 days, her name was on the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Within 2 weeks, it was trending on national news. And within a month, she became the symbol of a much larger story. A story about abuse behind bars, about institutional silence, and about a woman who had nothing left to lose, but used what little she had left to burn the whole thing down. The files sent to journalist Samantha Wells were just the beginning. Once the news broke, other women started coming forward. Former inmates, family members, even a retired nurse who'd once worked part-time in Palm Ridge's infirmary in 2020. "They threatened me," the nurse said in an anonymous interview. "They told me to keep my mouth shut about what I saw. One night, I found a girl bleeding in the showers. No report was ever filed. That's when I quit." More than 40 pages of previously lost documentation began surfacing online. Internal memos, incident reports, and sealed complaints with eerily similar details. Same officers, same tactics, same silence. Tasha's death hadn't just sparked sympathy. It sparked accountability. A 37-year-old woman named Janelle R., who'd been released from Palm Ridge in 2022, reached out to Samantha through encrypted email. In her statement, she wrote, "Tasha used to write for us. Letters to the parole board. Requests for pain meds. She had this weird calm about her. Like she already knew none of us were getting out. But she helped anyway, even when we were mean to her." Another woman, Tamika S., said she remembered seeing Tasha escorted out of her cell in the middle of the night. "I told the CO it wasn't right, that she didn't look okay. He told me to mind my business if I want to keep my teeth." These women weren't looking for revenge. Most of them weren't even asking for justice. They just wanted someone to listen, something Tasha had asked for until her final breath. Warden Charles Bailey tried to do damage control. He claimed Tasha had manipulated lonely staff. He accused Samantha Wells of spreading hysteria. He even implied that the HIV outbreak was coincidental. But it was too late. DOJ subpoenas were issued. Emails were recovered. And a whistleblower from inside Palm Ridge, an assistant to the medical director, handed over copies of the original HIV intake form from 2019. It had been marked confidential with a handwritten note in the margin. "Do not share with staff, per admin." That note would later become Exhibit A in a federal grand jury hearing. In October 2023, the first officer was officially indicted. Darnell Hughes was charged with aggravated sexual assault of an inmate, coercion under color of authority, knowingly exposing another to HIV, tampering with evidence. Tasha's journal had included 4 separate dates tied to his name, complete with times and locations. The prosecution even had a voice recording taken from Tasha's secret USB. He says, "If I tell anyone, they'll find me in the garden. Just another OD," he said. I believe him. In court, Hughes tried to claim the relationship was consensual, but the jury didn't buy it. He was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 35 years without parole. Tasha Monroe's case led to sweeping consequences. 3 more officers at Palm Ridge resigned or were indicted. The Georgia Department of Corrections launched an internal overhaul. A dozen other facilities across the country came under review. Senator Elaine Whitmore introduced a bill nicknamed the Tasha Act, requiring mandatory external audits of all inmate complaints and surveillance access in segregation units. For the first time, it felt like the system had been punched in the mouth by its own silence. And it bled. 2 months after Tasha's death, something unexpected happened. A letter was hand-delivered to the Atlanta Post. It was from Layla Monroe, now 8 years old. She had been living with her paternal grandmother, Angela Monroe, who had forbidden any communication with Tasha's side of the family. But the letter, written in pencil on lined notebook paper, read, "My name is Layla. My mom died in jail. She didn't kill nobody. She tried to keep me safe. Please tell people she wasn't bad. I remember her singing to me when I was scared. She made me pink pancakes." The editor published the letter in full. Within hours, thousands of people shared it with the hashtag Justice for Tasha. It wasn't just about prison reform anymore. It became personal. In a special televised segment on 60 Minutes, journalist Samantha Wells closed her interview with this. Tasha didn't scream. She didn't riot. She didn't burn anything down. But she exposed more rot with silence than most of us could with a megaphone. Her body is gone, but her story is just beginning. Palm Ridge Correctional Facility now has new leadership. Cameras were installed in segregation. A new complaint review board includes 2 former inmates. But some say it's not enough, because the system didn't just fail Tasha, it fed on her, and on hundreds like her. February 12, 2024, nearly 7 months after Tasha Monroe was found dead in her isolation cell at Palm Ridge Correctional Facility, a special congressional hearing was held in Washington, D.C. to address the growing crisis of sexual abuse and systemic cover-ups in women's correctional institutions across the country. The hearing had a name now, the Tasha Monroe Inquiry. And that morning, In a cold marble courtroom packed with lawmakers, journalists, and survivors, a little girl with 2 braided pigtails and trembling hands was escorted to the witness stand. Her name was Layla Monroe. She was 9 years old, and she was about to tell America who her mother really was. Layla sat nervously in a chair far too big for her. She wore a blue sweater, leggings, and a pair of worn pink sneakers. Her voice trembled at first, but she spoke without being prompted, without notes. My mommy didn't hurt people. She helped people. She was a nurse. She made Band-Aids with smiley faces. When she went to prison, Grandma told me never to talk about her again. But I remember she used to make pink pancakes on Saturdays, and we'd dance in the kitchen with socks on. I know she died, but I don't think it's fair people say she was evil. She was scared, but she was brave too. The room was silent. No camera clicks. No coughs. Just the sound of a child reclaiming the story of a woman the world had discarded. A few minutes later, when Layla quietly stepped down, several members of Congress had tears in their eyes. One called it the most powerful testimony I've heard in 20 years. Layla's words weren't the only ones heard that day. Over the course of 6 hours, 11 formerly incarcerated women took the stand. They described being groped during strip searches, being threatened with solitary confinement if they refused favors, being denied medical attention after assaults, being told they would never be believed. Several of them said that the first time they ever felt seen was when they read about Tasha's story. One survivor, Denise Hart, put it plainly. She died alone in a cell, but she made us believe we weren't crazy. That what happened to us was real, and now y'all have to believe us, too. Under mounting public pressure, the Federal Bureau of Prisons and the Georgia Department of Corrections were forced to respond. Director Mark Tillman testified before Congress, stating, "We acknowledge profound failures in our system, and we owe a debt to Ms. Monroe's family and to every woman who was failed by our oversight. But when pressed about why no one acted on Tasha's early complaints, or why her HIV status was kept secret, or how officers were allowed unsupervised contact, Tillman deflected. He said policies were in review. He said training modules would be updated. But for many watching, including survivors, it was clear they were sorry they got caught, not sorry it happened." 3 weeks after the hearing, the president signed into law the Tasha Act, a bipartisan bill that had passed both houses with overwhelming support. The bill included mandatory body cameras for all correctional officers in women's facilities, an external board of independent auditors to investigate inmate complaints, protection status for whistleblowers within correctional systems, ban on after-hour cell extractions without medical or legal justification. On the day of the signing, Layla and her foster family were invited to the White House. She wore the same pink sneakers, and as she stood beside the president, holding the signed document, reporters caught her saying one soft, unforgettable sentence. "Mommy would have liked this." In April 2024, on what would have been Tasha's 30th birthday, a memorial garden was opened in her name outside of Atlanta, a peaceful space surrounded by white lilies, engraved stones, and a plaque that read, "In silence, she spoke louder than anyone else." At the center of the garden was a simple gray bench. On it sat a mother and daughter, Tamika and Alina, 2 former inmates who had known Tasha in Palm Ridge. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Tasha had given them back their voices. Now they would use them. On the 1-year anniversary of Tasha's death, investigative journalist Samantha Wells published her final article on the case. The title? Justice Isn't Silent. The Story of Tasha Monroe. The closing paragraph read, "We will never know how many nights she cried into that mattress. We will never know how many times she tried to be heard and was ignored. But we know this. In death, Tasha Monroe did something few ever accomplish in life. She forced the world to look, not at her pain, but at ours. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough to change something." By the summer of 2024, the name Tasha Monroe had become shorthand for a broken system. News outlets called it the reckoning. Lawmakers called it reform. Survivors? They called it long overdue. But in the quiet corners of the country, in county jails, state prisons, and federal lockups, women still whispered her name the way soldiers remember fallen comrades. Not because she was a hero, but because she had been one of them. And in dying, she had done what most never get the chance to do. She made the world look inside the walls it built to forget them. In September 2024, Palm Ridge Correctional Facility reopened under a new name, Hope Valley Women's Center. New warden, new staff training, new motto etched over the front gates. Dignity, safety, redemption. But some things, critics argued, remained unchanged. Cells were still overcrowded. Mental health care was still understaffed. And the silence? It hadn't gone away. It had just learned to smile for the camera. One anonymous officer admitted to the Atlanta Post. They painted the walls. They handed us pamphlets. But at the end of the day, we're still a prison. And prisons are built on silence. In the months following the Tasha Act's passage, over 600 formal complaints were filed by incarcerated women across 22 states. Some are decades old. Some came with photographs, letters, or audio files. Most came with no physical proof, only stories no one had believed the first time. An advocacy group, Voices Inside, was formed to help document these testimonies. Their founder, Denise Hart, a former Palm Ridge inmate, shared, "We don't want revenge. We want acknowledgement. We want someone to finally say, yes, that happened to you, and it was wrong." But acknowledgement, it turns out, is harder to win than headlines. As with any national movement, there came resistance. Some conservative media outlets branded Tasha as a calculated manipulator who used her illness to weaponize guilt. Talk radio hosts asked, what about the guards? Should they not be protected too? Lawsuits were filed by 3 former correctional officers infected with HIV, claiming the Georgia Department of Corrections failed to warn them of Tasha's status. One suit read, Ms. Monroe knowingly and maliciously endangered the lives of staff. Her actions were premeditated and constitute bioassault. But civil rights attorneys push back. What's more dangerous, a woman fighting for dignity, or a system that silences women and rewards their abusers? The courtroom became the new battlefield, and in many ways, Tasha's story was being put on trial all over again. Now living with a foster family outside of Athens, Georgia, Layla Monroe had started 4th grade. She was quiet, protective, curious. At night, she sometimes read aloud from her mother's journal what little had been returned from the investigation. One entry read, "If she ever finds these words, Layla, you were always my light. You weren't born from pain. You were born from survival. And I hope the world is kinder to you than it was to me." Layla kept that page tucked behind her bed. She wanted to be a nurse, just like her mother. But she also wanted to be a writer, so people wouldn't forget what had happened. Not just to Mommy, she said. To all of them. Journalist Samantha Wells, who had first broken the story, was offered a book deal, a speaking tour, and even a Netflix documentary. She turned most of it down. Instead, she launched an initiative called Project Glass Cell, a nonprofit that trains incarcerated women to document abuse and advocate for themselves through writing, audio, and video. In a radio interview, she said, "Tasha made me realize journalism isn't just about telling the truth. It's about making sure the truth survives, even when the people who lived it don't." Despite all the change, all the hearings, and all the reforms, there remained an uncomfortable question. Was justice ever really served? Tasha Monroe never got to see her daughter again. She died alone in a box, with no ceremony, no goodbye. Her name was cleared in the public but not in court. And the officers who abused her? Not all were held accountable. A survivor named Celeste put it best at a town hall. Justice would have meant Tasha was heard while she was alive. Justice would have meant she got out, got to raise her daughter. What we have now isn't justice. It's the noise that comes after a scream no one answered. On July 12, 2024, exactly 1 year after her death, a crowd of nearly 500 gathered at the Tasha Monroe Memorial Garden. Inmates, activists, lawmakers, journalists, survivors. Layla was there too, standing beside the stone that bore her mother's name. Someone read a poem. Someone sang. Then Layla, holding a small microphone in hands that still trembled, looked out at the crowd and said, "My mommy told the truth, even when no one listened. Now you're listening. Please don't stop." 1 year, 3 months, and 4 days after Tasha Monroe's death, the prison where she once lived and died stood quieter than usual. The new administration at Hope Valley Women's Center declared the day one of remembrance. No forced labor, no mandatory programming, just a moment to pause. At 9:17 a.m., the exact minute Officer Maya Jenkins opened Tasha's cell door in 2023, an announcement echoed through the concrete halls. We honor the life and legacy of inmate Tasha Monroe. May her voice continue to be heard. For the women still inside those walls, the ones left behind, it wasn't just a moment of silence. It was the first time the prison had ever said any of their names out loud. In the months that followed the public inquiry, something remarkable began to happen. Women incarcerated in other prisons, Florida, Texas, New York, Indiana, began writing letters to Layla Monroe. Some sent drawings. Some sent poems. Some sent single, shaking sentences. She gave me courage. Tell your mommy thank you. She made me feel less alone. By the fall of 2024, Layla had received over 300 handwritten letters. She kept them all in a pink shoebox under her bed. Sometimes she'd sit with her foster mother and read them out loud, voice soft but steady. One day she asked, "Do you think Mommy hears them?" Her foster mother, holding back tears, nodded. "I think she hears every single one." Though not every perpetrator was punished and not every wound was healed, change did come. 4 states implemented Tasha-inspired reforms in their correctional systems. 3 other prison facilities quietly shut down or were placed under federal review. A national hotline was created for incarcerated women to report abuse anonymously. And a scholarship fund in Tasha's name now supports young women pursuing careers in nursing and law, 2 things Tasha never stopped believing in. But perhaps most importantly, for the first time in decades, America was finally willing to ask a hard question. What happens when the system designed to rehabilitate becomes the abuser? And through that question came a painful, necessary answer. Layla, now 10, still doesn't fully understand the weight her mother's story holds. But she knows her name. She knows what her mother stood for. And every Sunday, she visits the garden where her ashes were scattered, beneath a maple tree with a brass plaque that simply reads, "She spoke through silence. We listened too late." Sometimes Layla brings flowers. Sometimes she brings pancakes, dyed pink with food coloring. And one afternoon, she brought her notebook. She sat under the tree and read aloud a story she'd written for class. Once upon a time, there was a woman who lived in a big, gray castle. But the castle wasn't magical. It was cold and sad. The woman couldn't scream, so she wrote on the walls. And one day, the people outside finally saw the writing, and they broke down the gates. In late 2024, Samantha Wells received one last file. It had been delayed in processing by the prison's legal department, held for sensitivity review. It was a voice recording dated June 30th, 2023, 2 days before Tasha entered segregation. She sounded calm, clear, resolved. "If anyone is hearing this, it means I didn't make it out. That's okay. I didn't expect to. What I hoped is that someone, anyone, would realize that I'm not the only one. I'm not even the worst story in this place. I just stopped hiding it. So if you're hearing this, please don't just fight for me. Fight for the ones still breathing, the ones who still think no one cares. Because silence doesn't mean nothing happened. It just means someone got really good at surviving it." The audio ends with the faint sound of humming. A lullaby, possibly the one she used to sing to Layla. Tasha Monroe didn't have money. She didn't have a platform, a microphone, or a lawyer who believed her. What she had was a notebook, a pen casing, a used MP3 recorder, and a daughter. But somehow, she used those scraps of survival to create a movement. Her story made it harder for predators to hide. Her death forced people to face what they'd ignored. And her silence? It echoed louder than 1,000 screams. You may never see Tasha Monroe's name in a history book, but ask any woman who has survived behind bars, and they'll tell you. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was proof. Proof that voices don't need to be loud to change the world. They just need to be heard. And now that we've heard her, what will we do with the silence she left behind?